We are, pandemic notwithstanding, which adds a weird caveat to all of this, which we're also working through. But we're going into a recession. We've been talking about it. If you've been around me or any circle I've been in, I've been talking about the fact that we were due for a recession, and it's a part of the normal cycle of capitalism. So it's an inherent part of capitalism, and it's nothing to really be scared about, but they have a massive impact. So we have within the economic cycle, so for those who took macroeconomics, this may be somewhat familiar to you, but within macroeconomics, you have short-term debt cycles and you have long-term debt cycles. Long-term debt cycles kind of take a generation to play through. So we're looking at like the 40 to 70 year cycle. Short-term debt cycles take about 10 years. Okay, we have a weird combo happening where we have a long-term and short-term debt cycle hitting at the same time. And for those who are getting lost, I'll just make it simple. Debt cycles work like this. You get a job, okay, and now you're paying your bills on time, so your credit gets better. Because your credit gets better and you have discretionary income, banks are willing to give you a credit card, and you're able to buy a car and get a personal loan and get a mortgage. And all of these things increase your spending power. Now they're tricky because they don't directly, unless you're in the wealth camp, and we'll talk about the difference in the wealthy to poor mentality here in a second. But what's tricky about that is they increase your spending power, but are they increasing your income? No, they're not. Right? And most of us have experienced this. Wow, we go to college. When I went to college, literally day one, there was guys out front handing out credit card. I think they've since made that so you can't do that. But there was guys handing out credit cards, applications for credit cards, and college students were grabbing them like crazy. They're used to getting, grants and different kinds of funding. So like, oh, here's one more. Okay, so now your credit's getting better. Your income, you're starting to get income, so now you become more credit worthy. Because you're more credit worthy, you are now extended lines of credit in the form of, again, a credit card, a personal loan, a mortgage, all these different ways that you're being extended credit, which increases your purchasing power, right? It increases how much you can spend. The problem is where are you pushing that off to? Your future self. Your future self is going to have to pay for all of this shit that you're buying that you're not paying cash for. Now, capitalism works this way. This is, some would argue, an inherent flaw in capitalism. I don't think it's a flaw, but it is part of capitalism. So stay with me. I'm hoping I'm going to drop a little macroeconomics understanding in here so you can think of where you are in this. Okay? So increase in purchasing power, because people can spend more, they do. Right? And think about, in a capitalist society, you have a fuck ton of money spent on marketing and advertising. Why? Because it's trying to drive consumerism. You must buy, you must buy, you must buy, right? There is a savage pull for us to have the newest, latest everything. Right? I say this all the time, but in a country where even the poorest of the poor have Jordans and iPhones, we're doing pretty, something's cracking. I mean, like, how the hell is that possible? Right? So this, what happens is now we're mortgaging essentially our future. We're saying, hey, we're buying things for the now that we're going to have to pay off over time. Okay? So as a society, what ends up happening here is that these short-term debt cycles happen every 10 years. You get to a point where now your income can no longer support your spending plus your debt. Okay, and some of you guys have experienced this earlier. So translation, if I just lost you, okay, so in the beginning you get a $5,000 credit card, and so you get your $5,000 credit card, you think it's great, and you buy yourself some new clothes, you go out with your friends, you put it on your credit card, very quickly, and without even realizing it, you've maxed out your fucking credit card. But no big deal, I'm making enough money, I can pay my $50 payment every month, no problem. Because you're making your $50 payment every month, the bank comes back and goes, hey, economy's good, everybody's healthy, we're going to bump that credit limit up for you another $5,000. You're like, oh, rich, another 5 grand. I'm in good shape, right? And then here comes the car loan opportunities. Hey, here's a 0% loan. Here's a lease that looks really sexy. You have great credit, okay? So you're like, wow, I got another $5,000 on my credit card, and now I can go buy this car, and it's only $600 a month. Listen, if I just do 4 sales for 1 week, I've covered it. No big deal, right? So this is the math going on in your head. So what ends up happening at this time, for most people, and there's 2 ways this shows up, but for most people, their income hasn't meaningfully gone up, okay? But their purchasing power has because of debt. We got to understand this, the inherent relationship between these 2 things. So my underlying income has not gone up, my purchasing power because of debt has. Well, what happens is in a short-term debt cycle, what ends up happening here is you get to a point where, okay, now you have $10,000 worth of credit card, throw on your student loans and your car, and now your income is barely making the payments on all of that, and you don't have the ability to continue to have purchasing power. Your purchasing power now has greatly decreased, okay? And our society right now with precious little millennials, they think this shit's unfair. It's unfair that I have this debt. I have to have these things, right? Ask the greatest generation, as they're called, the guys that lived through the fucking World War II and the Great Depression, and ask them if you have to have those things. Okay, but in our society, we believe we have to have these things. So now we're asking the government to wipe out our student debt, to wipe out our car loans, and they're doing it. And this is why we're seeing the Fed inject $2 trillion. Now we're going to go to $4 trillion. And by the time we're done, probably $10 trillion fucking dollars to offset this great cycle that we're in. Okay, now it is important to understand at this point, those were all consumer choices. Nobody forced you to go to school on debt. Nobody forced you to buy a car on debt. Nobody forced you to use a credit card. You chose to do those things because of what you valued. And this is important. I want everybody to get this. Is we're going to talk about the difference between wealthy and unwealthy people, and consumerism is a big part of this. Thorstein Veblen was an American economist in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s. So during the Roaring 20s, we brought back the Roaring 20s, didn't we? But so he was a economist during that time period, which was a time of big economic upheaval in our country. The 1920s were actually pretty fantastic, much like we just saw from 2010 to 2020. Very good economy. Everyone's employed. That's why we called it the Roaring 20s. Prohibition. This should sound familiar. Prohibition went away, which means people could start drinking alcohol. What happened in this decade? We could start hitting the weed. It was all good. Prohibition goes away, right? So we had this, and it was called the Roaring 20s, this big run-up. Very, very fascinating. Thorstein Veblen, and he was an economist at the time, he says, he dubbed it, it was an essay he wrote called Conspicuous Consumption. Conspicuous Consumption. Worth a read for anybody who's fascinated. But he talks about this idea that this keeping up with the Joneses, as later it was dubbed, but this American idea of consumerism, that we always have to have the nicest things, we always have to have the newest things. And listen, all of marketing is telling you that. You can't go anywhere. You can't turn on a screen. You can't, if you're driving down the road, unless you're in Orange County because billboards are illegal. But most places you can't turn without somebody wanting something from you, right? And telling you you need to do more or be more to be valued. Okay, well, there's a reason for that. The entire capitalist society runs on consumerism. It does not exist without the consumer continuing to spend money. So in the last downturn, hopefully this is, yeah, Great Gatsby is a great reference. So you look at the Roaring 20s. Anybody know what happened at the end of the Roaring 20s? 1929. Somebody want to jump in here?
The Great Depression.
Stock market tanked. We hit the Great Depression. Is the beginning of the Great Depression, right? And so this, I'm creating context here, hopefully, because I want you guys to understand how we're going to navigate through this and how we're going to take advantage of this. And I don't want you to be scared of what's happening or get worried. And no doubt your parents, your grandparents are worried about it. We're going to talk about how do we not only survive this, how do we thrive during this time? But I want to set the stage about what's going on here and why we're in an incredible opportunity to take advantage of it. Okay, so hopefully money isn't boring to you guys, and if it is, then we need to have another conversation, because unfortunately the country we live in, the world we live in, money is a big part of how this whole thing works, and we want to understand it. Otherwise you end up holding on to liabilities that somebody else's asset. We may get into that too in a little bit. Okay, so end of the 1920s, you have the Great Depression. It took us almost a decade to get out of the Great Depression. Okay, if you remember, some of you may or may not remember, in 2007, 2008, right before Obama got elected and we were starting to see a downturn, George W. Bush was the president of the United States. And if you remember, he came out and said, he actually gave us a tax stimulus that was only like $650, not $1,200. You would have had to have been a working American to get that at that time, which statistically most of you were probably in middle school or high school. Tony, you know what I'm talking about. Tony's with me. Although you were probably in the military. I don't know if the military guys got it or not, but.
Yeah, I was a military spouse. Military people got it.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, I remember that all too well.
Yeah, oh yeah. So he comes out, he gives the stimulus. This sounds very familiar, right? And the number one thing he said, don't stop spending money, right? He, like, literally, the president of the United States on mainstream media said, don't stop spending money. Why is he saying that? Because he understands short-term debt cycles and how capitalism works. Okay, this is why this particular pandemic created so much fuckery, because we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. Small business is getting hammered right now because we can't go out and spend money. This is also why Walmart and Amazon just hit record highs, if you guys are following the stock market, because we still want to spend money. Americans, we're all about it. We'll find ways to spend money. We're just going to do it online now and through Walmart. Okay, so he gives a stimulus. He tells everybody, don't stop spending money. Well, what happened? So now we have this credit, right? We're over leveraged is what it's called, both businesses and individuals. And we'll go back. We'll show it in 2008 here. If you've watched The Big Short, and I told you guys to do that, I think last week, suggested if you haven't, go watch it. It does a great job of explaining historically what happened. But okay, so 2006, 2007, I knew we were in for a major pain, because we had 21-year-old kids making $250,000 a year in the mortgage industry that didn't have a clue what they were doing. And quite literally, they were blowing it on coke and strippers and anything other than other assets. Right, and a lot of these guys came into the business right when I was starting, and they were all 1099. They hadn't paid their taxes, and so now the IRS is sending me statements saying, "Hey, these guys owe $250,000 in back taxes." Imagine being 23 years old, not being able to find a job that even pays you $50,000 a year, and now having to owe the government $200,000, $300,000. Well, what was happening? Okay, so you go back 2006, 2008. Stay with me. Trading the floor here. Some context. You had literally the running joke. You had dogs, and this isn't a joke. You had houses bought in the name of people's dogs. The industry had become so unscrupulous that they were handing out mortgages to people because they were mortgage-backed securities that were getting thrown in with these other buckets. And so the grade of the debt was going way down, and nobody noticed except for one dude who shorted the market and made a fuck ton of money. Okay? But so all this was happening. What's happening? This is a short-term debt cycle. Okay, and really I think it was the long-term debt cycle. The Fed just intervened. That collapsed the mortgage industry, too big to fail. What was happening is, by the time the guy bought his fifth house that he shouldn't have, he had no business owning, he had no way to pay for all 5 houses with the income he was making. Credit outstripped income. So now, even if my income goes up marginally, which this is where we take inflationary, deflationary pressures. We start looking at on income, increase in income. Okay, even if income is going up. By the way, does anybody know what the average income increase is annually across the board? These are fun things to know.
2%?
It's exactly right, Lucas. Yep, it's about 1.5%. Average raise in the United States takes 4 years, and it's about a 4.5% raise. Don't believe me? Just start Googling this shit. It'll start waking you the fuck up pretty quick. We're going to get back to why this business, why now in a second. Promise. Okay. So 1.5% income rise against increased debt. So what ends up happening is eventually the American consumer gets to a point where the amount of debt they have is now barely being supported by their income. Some of you guys are like, you're talking to me right now. Okay, yeah. So there's your situation. Okay, what happens when your income, now I'm talking about big groups of people, not individuals, because there are things individuals can do, but as a group, as an American group, what happens when your income now can only support your debt? What behavior changes?
Spending.
Consumer spending drops. This is why if you trade in the markets, you know one of the big indicators that everybody looks at is consumer sentiment. Consumer sentiment is an indication of how comfortable consumers are continuing to go into debt and continuing to purchase, right? So consumer spending starts tanking. Okay, so now that restaurant that was super hot and was packed every Friday night only has half as many people in it. Okay, when it has half as many people in it, what happens? Does it need 100 employees? No, it needs half as many employees. So now it only has 50 employees, which means 50 people just got laid off. Those 50 people get laid off. Are they going to be spending less money or more money? Less money. And now the cycle whiplashes. And now we get into a time where you have a tightening credit. Typically, interest rates rise to offset this, which interest rates rising ends up, people stop using credit as much because you're tightening the credit restrictions. And this is why we're in a scary situation right now, because what are interest rates at? Anybody?
Zero.
Zero.
Low, very low.
Zero. There is no more quantitative easing that can happen through interest rates. Okay, that's not a play anymore. Negative interest rates are next, which we may see. And the only other option the Fed has was to start printing a fuck ton of money to literally inject, because there is no credit available in that sense, to inject cash into the environment so that Americans do what? Spend
more. Spend it.
Which isn't going to happen. So what happens now is you have a short-term debt cycle that is resetting. They won't spend until their credit decreases far enough that there's enough of a buffer between their income and their credit that they feel comfortable spending. When consumer spending goes down, everything else goes down because people are taking less vacations, tourism industry gets hit. People are buying less shit, the retail industry gets hit. They're going out less to restaurants, the restaurant industry gets hit. And all of those people that employ people have to lay people off, okay? Well, this recession was going to happen regardless of a pandemic. Now we throw a pandemic in where we're literally being forced to stay at home and we can't spend money. And now the Fed is printing as much money as it can to artificially keep businesses open. Okay, so knowing that consumer spending is what keeps America healthy and all capitalism societies healthy, who then is the most important feature to a capitalist society?
Salespeople.
Salespeople.
We are.
Correct. So I have been saying this over and over again for a good part of a decade. When you walk down the road, you should just start high-fiving people and tell them you're welcome. I'm like, well, you're welcome for what? You have a job, right? Because I work my ass off to create revenue, to increase gross domestic product in the United States. Make no mistake, unless you work for the government, right, who just prints their own money, unless you work for the government or a government institution, everyone else has a job because somebody sold something. That's capitalism. Everyone else has a job because somebody else sold something. So anybody who isn't in sales, by the way, are the first people to get laid off. In any kind of recession, and that's usually middle management, because they're overpaid for the work they're doing, right? We're about to see, when we get back to interviewing, which we're going to start interviewing soon, right? And when you look at this group, middle management who we're going to be interviewing a fuck ton of, and there's going to be a lot of sharp people and middle management that are like, I don't want to go that route anymore. So for the owners on the call, the assistant managers on the call, you chuckle how many times you've interviewed somebody that, you know, you've asked them, you know, what is your goal? Where do you want to go? And they say, oh, I want to get into management. I don't think anybody fucking knows what they're saying when they say that, but they don't know what else to say. So it's just, hey, corporate America, I want to get into management. The problem with that is what they mean is in the short run, the closest thing they're going to get to management is middle management. And what happens in recessions, middle management gets squeezed. That's middle America. Middle America is getting squeezed like crazy right now. Upper management will take the higher end tasks that they do and go, okay, I'll take those. And they'll hire entry levels who are willing to work for 20, 30% less to do the more menial tasks that they do. So if I'm working for a company, if I'm coaching anybody who works for a company, first thing I tell them, you better make sure you're on the revenue side of the business and show how you're creating revenue for the business. And two, you better do shit that makes you close to irreplaceable, right? Because if you're not one of those two things, you're incredibly vulnerable right now. And we haven't, and this isn't fear, I'm not a fear guy. This is the reality of our situation. We have not even begun to see what's about to happen. It's going to get very rough for a lot of people. And this is very normal. So we have a super cycle going on right now, which you're going to start hearing that term likely, where you have short-term cycle that needed to get closed up with a long-term cycle of debt. And the Fed is fucking gassing it into this by just, we're going to double down on this long-term cycle and print 10 trillion more dollars here, because why not? Right? Which it's crazy. And that's why there's a lot of people, very, very smart people saying, oh yeah, there's going to be a lot of pain related to this because we're eventually going to have to pay back all of that money. And then there's the debt cycle is going to have to reset. The only way the debt cycle resets is when people stop spending money and get out of debt, which will make the economy stronger in the long run, but will create lots of pain in the short run because debt creates jobs. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I'm going to pause and explain why our business in a second. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm saying and they get what I'm saying? I know I just gave you a pretty high level macroeconomics lesson, but there's a framing here that was important, pre-frame. Anybody? Questions? Backwards of quantitative easing suggests that it doesn't increase inflation. Do you support bringing the US dollar back to the gold standard, prefer fiat currency? How does debt become an advantage? Okay, we're going to talk about this in a second. Great questions. When talking about quantitative easing, if it's balanced correctly, we can keep inflation in check, but inflation is one of the ways that consumer spending changes. So I don't think going back to a gold standard is the right thing, or frankly is even possible. What is more likely to happen is blockchain technology is going to allow us to use cryptocurrency to manage this in a completely different way in decentralized banking, which will have some very interesting effects. Yeah, Bitcoin is one of those options. That's the name. Now, that isn't my endorsement to go invest in Bitcoin right now. We're going to find ultimately there will be a change up at some point in how we manage currency, but fiat currency isn't really a negative thing per se if it's backed up by an economy that can back it up. So our currency, if you look, it says right on the bill here, this is a Federal Reserve note, right? Another way of looking at this, right across the top, if you look at any dollar you have, it says right across the top, Federal Reserve note. What is that? That is an IOU from the Federal Reserve that says, yeah, we got your back on this. It's like $20. Right? So I don't get caught up in whether there's an actual backing or representation. At the moment, the American economy is what's backing up these. And we're leveraging against the American economy and injecting more money into the economy right now in ways that is pretty interesting. So I realize I probably lost some of you, but there was a reason that I wanted to talk about this right now, because there's a pre-frame when we start talking about money. So I'm going to come back to this phrase many times today, but I want you all to write this down. And can I see everybody's faces? I want to see
I have
people's
a
faces
question,
about money
Sebastian.
today. Huh?
I have a question.
Okay, hold on a second.
Okay.
More faces. Come on, guys. I don't want to talk to names. I want to talk to people. Okay, and I'm going to answer your question, Ricky, in a second. So I want you to write this down, and I want you to commit this to memory. Wealth is not a possession. Wealth is a mentality. No amount of money is going to make you wealthy. Wealth is not a possession, it's a mentality. Write this down. I want you to commit to it. I want this to become integrated knowledge for you. I want you to understand this. Okay? Here's what I mean by it. And we're going to come back to this many times today. But here's what I mean by it. We could take all of the wealth that's being printed right now and redistribute it to every world citizen across the board universally. Everybody gets the same starting hand, right? Whatever that number would be. Okay, so let's say everybody starts with $10,000. Nobody has more than $10,000. Everybody in the world has exactly $10,000, $1,200. Yeah. Okay, so now everybody has that amount of money. Within 3 to 5 years, 90% of that wealth is going to be back in the hands of the people who are actually wealthy, meaning the people that actually understand how money works. It's not a possession. How do I know this? Fact check what I'm saying. Do you know statistically how many lottery winners go bankrupt? It's an insane number.
Like 90% probably.
Hey Google, how many lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years?
On the website nefe.org, they say, Denver, over the past couple of years, several news organizations have attributed a statistic to the National Endowment for Financial Education,
You're not answering my
stating
question.
that 70% of lottery winners end up bankrupt in just a few years after receiving a large financial windfall.
Yeah, she did. She did answer it for me at the very end there. Long-winded. We got to work on this, Goobs, you and me. Long-winded, but the answer was 70% within 2 years. How the fuck, if money makes you wealthy, how is that possible?
Like you said, it's mentality.
Because wealth is not a possession, it's a mentality. I want to get into this today, deeply today, because as we go forward, as the framing going forward, we're going to work our way towards wealth. Started with self-awareness. This is going to be a topic we're going to be on all week, but we're integrating it with money awareness. Wealth is not a possession, it's a mentality. So, we think 70% of lottery winners. Think about all the athletes. A good friend of mine was went and played in the NFL, played for the Ravens for a few years as a defensive back, played for USC when Pete Carroll was there, won a title with him. He said he couldn't believe the stats on how many guys had $1 million contracts that were broke years after they left the NFL. This was such a big deal to the NFL that they made it in their last CBA, this is 2 CBAs ago, agreement, they made it so that when you signed a contract, you also had to have a financial advisor, somebody to help you manage your money. Because money doesn't make you wealthy. Understanding money and how to use it makes you wealthy. There's a big, big difference. Okay, and so why does this matter right now? Because any politician, any person, but specifically usually your politicians touting this shit, that are telling you that they're going to give you money and that's going to make your life better. We know, yes, for sure, there might be a short-term uptick, right? That may appease the masses. It may stave off, getting kicked out of your apartment, maybe stave off bankruptcy for a little bit longer. But somebody giving you money isn't going to solve your wealth problem. The worst thing you could do to somebody is give them money. That's why there's an old saying that wealth skips a generation. Anybody ever heard that phrase? Wealth skips a generation. The reason is very hard to find a wealthy man, self-made wealthy man, that is the son of a self-made wealthy man. That's why Bill Gates and a number of billionaires, which is still kind of a crazy number to think about, but a number of billionaires came out and said they were giving less than 1% of their net worth to their children. Now, in the case of Bill Gates, 1% still is like a 250 milli inheritance. So fuck. But principally, I love where he's going with it, right? Like he gets it. Like if you inherit wealth, you were never taught, you never had to work for, you don't understand how it was achieved. You don't know the sweat equity that went into it. You won't know what to do with it. Somebody telling you they're going to give you money puts them in control, not you. You want an education. Find somebody who will teach you how to make money. That's the name of the game. Okay, so we'll put it in a different context. Would you rather somebody give you a fish every day? You stay at home, you get up in the morning, wrapped, beautifully caught this that morning, it's sitting on your front door is a fish. It's gonna feed your whole family for the day, and you're like, fuck it, I don't have to do anything. I can stay home, I can read, I can watch television, I can hang out with my family, I don't have to do shit. And this fish shows up every day and takes care of my family. Would you rather that, okay, sounds very appealing, right? Fish at your door every day, don't have to worry about it, family's fed. Would you rather that or have somebody teach you how to fish?
I'd rather learn how to fish.
Learn how to fish.
Teach how to fish. Yeah, that's what.
I would rather learn how to fish, and it's this simple. Who's in control in the scenario in which the fish shows up at my door every day? Who's in control?
Kids in control.
The person who's giving you the fish.
The person who caught the fucking fish and is giving it to you has all the power, has all the control. Me, when it's time to go get your vote, who you voting for? You voting your conscience? You voting because you're a free human being, or you voting to protect your family?
Because I'm a free human being.
Well, you hope. But if the vote is, I either vote my conscience or I vote for the guy that's going to continue to ensure I get my fish, even though maybe it's only 3/4 of a fish now, I got a family to protect. I got a family to take care of. Everybody understand what I'm saying right now? We're going to come full force on why you got to run your own business here in a second. But hopefully this is what we call a pre-frame. I'm giving you an example of what a pre-frame is, which we're going to talk about in the second part here. And I'm going to get to your question in a second, Samantha, and Ricky, I'm going to get to your question too. You want to know how to hunt. You want to know how to fish. You want to know how to create wealth. You do not want to outsource that to somebody else. And if you're a student of history, this is clear on so many levels, it's not even funny. This goes back to a phrase I've been saying a lot. Everybody wants change. Nobody wants to change. It sure the hell sounds a lot sexier, right? To have somebody else do the work and just pay me. Okay. All right, all right. Let's get back after it. Ricky, so when you have, for wealthy people, now here's what's really frustrating for middle class people more than anyone, right? All of this quantitative easing, all of this 0% interest rate where money is easily available. Okay, if there is quantitative easing and credit gets restricted, which we're seeing this, all the big banks, they have had a flood of people trying to refinance. They're trying to refinance when their job has been cut, they've been furloughed, income has dropped. So all of the big boys, the big four, which are in a ton of pain, if you looked at their quarterly earnings, they're already in a ton of pain. All of them are starting to tighten their credit criteria, meaning it's now going to get harder to get a credit card. It's going to get harder to get a mortgage or a refinance mortgage. unless you have what?
Cash.
Unless you have great credit, great income, and most importantly, write this word down. It's one of 6 that I want you to know in finances today. You have assets. What group has assets?
The wealthy.
The wealthy.
Rich people.
So when we see this, and I get that there's, Winston Churchill, I think, gets credit for saying, I'm paraphrasing him, but he says capitalism is horrible. It just happens to be the best of what we've got, right? Meaning all the alternatives are even worse. But right now, wealthy people are going to get more wealthy, and it's going to piss people off even more. Why? Because they're the ones with the assets, they're the ones with the cash and the good credit, and now they're getting free money, essentially, because they're getting money that they're not paying much interest on at all. And assets are going on sale. So now they're going to swoop in and buy everything for 30 cents, 40 cents, 60 cents on the dollar. This is why the wealthier get wealthier and the poor get poor. This isn't a possession, it's a mentality. Now, the good news is we all live in the United States. Everything we're talking about, anyone on this call can do. We don't have a class system where you're locked in and there's nothing you can do about it. As we get into this, we're going to get into a financial masterclass on what you can do to participate in the great transfer of wealth that's happening right now. Okay? But if you have assets, you can get approved. If you have assets, you can get things for cheap. So Ricky, to your question, if you have assets, you have good credit, you know how to make money work for you, you can go borrow money for very cheap, put it to work. If you're getting the money for 1% and you're putting it to work at 8%, you just leveraged X amount of dollars at 7%. That's what wealthy people are doing. They're making their money work harder than they do. And anybody can do this. You just have to be educated and know what it is. Okay? So the group that's going to benefit most from the shit that's happening right now, poor people, we're going to try to stave off the pain, right? So that there isn't too much suffering. The middle class is going to get squeezed even harder. The wealthy are going to end up wealthier. Right? In the midst of this pandemic, Amazon and Walmart both at all-time highs. Interesting, right? Bezos just threw a few more $1 billion on the run. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Right guy, right time, right key timing's preparation. He's in position to be able to take advantage of it. But it helps you understand where money is and how to make it work for you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
All right, it goes back to that article. The quote where you said that wealth skips a generation when it goes down to the billionaires and how they'll give less than 1%. How do you make the end decision as far as like you have a certain lifestyle you want to live, but you don't want to spoil your kids? I don't have kids yet, but is there something right now that you're doing, like any practices you put to teach them the principles of money without spoiling them, but still living that lifestyle that you work for?
Yeah, a lot of it is in my example, right? So thankfully my kids were born while I've been building wealth, right? So they've seen me working, which would be different if by the time they were born, I was essentially, I was already retired or semi-retired and working from home more. And they didn't actually see me put in the work. My children have absolutely seen me put in the work, and they continue to. And then a lot of his work, we have a ritual now, which I love, is go on walks as a family. And in doing so, there's a lot of conversations where I'm taking one or both of them off and just having side conversations. And we're talking about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the economy, just catching up and talking about these principles. And then, they live very good lives. They don't want for anything, but if they ask for something over and above, then I create currency tied to it. And the currency right now is picking up dog poop. So I'll literally ask them, how many dog poops is this worth to you? Right? Like they wanted battle pass for Fortnite this last season, right? I'm like, well, how many dog poops is this worth to you? 20? Then we negotiate down. It's worth fucking 15. They don't say fucking, but it's worth 15 dog poops. All right, 15 dog poops. All right, I'll settle at that. 15 dog poops and it's yours. So those are, I'm teaching them the nature of exchange and money. And I explain why. Like, hey, like, eventually you're going to have to figure out how to do this on your own. And so it's, again, this goes back to the fundamental principle of my entire teaching style, which is if we can get people to think right, we don't have to tell them to do right.
Right.
So I spend a lot of time teaching my kids how to think. And now that they're getting older, it's getting easier and easier to do it. But my example is really important, right? They see me work. They see me get up every day, even though I'm at home, and I get ready for my day and I put on the top half of my suit and I'm in my office most of the day, and they know that I'm working. And so those are the big things. Whereas if your kids never saw you work and they just inherited wealth, that's rough, because there's no model. They've never saw anybody work for it. And now you're asking them to work for it and telling them, back in my day. I'm like, yeah, right.
That's good. Thank you, man.
Yeah, good question.
Hey, Sebastian, I've got a question.
Yeah, Vincent, what's up, baby? Did you
How's it going?
did you make money on that Boeing pop?
So far, so good. We're still waiting long term for that one, though. You know,
You're playing it out long term. I would have got in and out on the trade, but anyway.
I believe in the company. Anyway,
I do too.
yeah.
Actually, it's an American company. Fuck, but
Great American company.
Yeah.
So you made a really good point on Amazon and Walmart reaching all-time highs. With this, I believe you're going to see a lot of mom and pop shops going out of business. So I wanted to ask you what your take on monopolies in America is right now. And do you think that antitrust laws should be strengthened in response to this? Because we're going to lose a lot of small businesses. I know there is a movement to break up a lot of the giant tech companies in Silicon Valley. So yeah, I just wanted to see what you think about that.
yes, it's a great question, Vincent. So we have antitrust laws, the Sherman laws, that protect against monopolies. AT&T was one of the recipients of that. Microsoft in recent years has been a recipient of pieces of that, which allowed companies like Google and even Apple to show up. Many people don't know this, but Microsoft, Bill Gates specifically invested $100 million into Apple because he needed a competitor. Otherwise, he would have been in big trouble because there was no competition. And so you see this, and now they're talking about breaking up Facebook because they're too big. Between Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, they have like 6 billion customers. Now, obviously, there's overlapping customers there, but that's an insane amount of reach. So, and then to Vincent's point, is very insightful. The average small business has 32 days of cash flow, meaning they can't go more than 32 days without cash flow, or they're going to go out of business. Most restaurants are 17 days. Right. So you think about this quarantine, on average, we look across the country, across the world, it's been around 90 days before getting back to normal. And we don't even know what back to normal is. Wuhan's already looking like they're dealing with a secondary infection phase, and they may get shut down again. Right. And that happens, there's a whole other piece that falls in here. So what ends up happening is, and this is why you saw some negative articles around like Shake Shack, who got $10 million in PPP assistance, and they're not really considered a small business, but because most franchises are set up in a way where you have individual franchisees, they certainly fell into the criteria. They ended up giving the money back because of the negative publicity, but like Cheesecake Factory tried getting that money too for the same reason for all the individual restaurants. And those aren't considered small companies. Big companies are too big to fail, and everybody's still going there. So what's happening is there's a massive squeeze on small business in the United States, right? Amazon hired, I think, 50,000 more people, and Walmart's trying to hire 150,000 more people to get these people employed. But now you have very big companies employing massive groups of people. They become like little mini governments in and of themselves. And so we have laws that try to protect and offset anti-competition and monopolies. And there's certainly intelligent arguments for why monopolies are good in some cases, not in others. But I think the core of the question is small business is getting squeezed like crazy, which is why you're seeing the government just, 350 billion was the first allocation for the PPP. And it was spent in 13 days. And now there's another 368 billion that's on docket to get approved right now. pork barreling notwithstanding. And then Howard Schwartz, the CEO of Starbucks, comes out and says any stimulus for small business that doesn't start with a T isn't enough. T meaning $1 trillion stimulus. Well, why? Anybody know what percentage of the US population is employed by a small business? Small business is an employer under 500, in case anybody's curious.
Was it like 70?
About 70%.
About 70% currently. So government gets it. If small business gets tanked, consumer spending gets tanked, and no big company is going to save the US. If you're wondering why there's money being injected back into small business, that's why. Small business is a better place to inject it than give it back to the consumer, because if you give it to the consumer directly and not back into a business, the consumer rips through that money and doesn't have a job. We're back in square one. By the way, what percentage of that consumer spending is going to go to a big business? Massive. Probably 60, 70%, right? As most people are spending at Walmart and Amazon right now. So we have in our house, we joke about this, but there's a serious point to it. We're ordering food out at least 3 or 4 nights a week right now. And cooking at home is fun, but we'll say, what small business do we want to support today? Right? And we're ordering from small mom and pop shops that are trying to stay open and try to compete. And this could be a very serious issue. Small business is the health of the United States, which is why we're seeing lots of money trying to prop up and support them. So anyway, it's a great question, Vincent. I don't know if I answered it, but that's, that's the situation we're in. And I think there's going to have to be, when I hear all this, just the way my brain is framed, and we're starting Monday with finance, and thank God nobody's having to go to the field after this, because it gets people thinking, as it should. But to me, all I see is opportunity. All of this just smacks of opportunity for somebody who's willing to work hard, who gets it and understand what's going on. And again, wealth is a mindset. It is not a possession. We are not going to give people out of poverty. You're going to educate people out of poverty. Okay, I'm gonna say that one more time. You are not going to give people out of poverty. You are going to educate them out of poverty. And that changes the game. So, and that's why you guys have heard me say many times, only free people can help other people get free. Free people get to vote their conscience. They get to think differently. They have the luxury of thinking differently because they're not in survival mode, right? We can get people free. We can get them thinking in a free way. We can help other people get free. Which, if anybody's been following along with HEP's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or if you just read the book, there's 3 phases, really 3.5 phases of human interaction. We all come into the world dependent, right? And then we go from dependent to ideally independent, and only independent people can become what? Somebody fill it in. Interdependent. Right? Some people go to dependent to codependent, and they need therapy to deal with that shit. Half joking, but also funny, but very real. So dependence can lead to codependence. If you're moving up the chain, you go from dependence to independence to interdependence. So the premise of my teaching is to teach people first how to be independent, and then from independence, let's create an independent system that has its own checks and balances. By the way, this is why, and this isn't an endorsement of Bitcoin or any current cryptocurrency. It's the reason why a lot of people love cryptocurrency and why a very small few are very scared of it, because it makes the entire system decentralized and interdependent. There isn't one major government or one major system like the IMF ruling it. So anyway, I'm going to check in here real quick. I know I'm going very deep into math, economics, and economic philosophy. Can you guys just give me a little where you're at with this? This is important stuff, which is why I'm talking about it, but I realize it can be a struggle for some people. How are we feeling? How are we feeling about what I'm dropping?
Great content.
Love it.
Great stuff. Good.
Awesome.
Coming at a great time, Saps. Thank you.
Amazing.
Full.
Good.
Great way to start the week.
Yeah, well, we're gonna start integrating more math, business with self-awareness. Self-awareness isn't gonna go away. It's a hallmark of my teaching style, but we're gonna keep integrating it back in, but we've got a pretty good structure here we can work from. Okay, so now we know we got a short-term debt cycle that's about to reset. We have a long-term debt cycle that's about to reset. The Fed is doing everything in its freaking power to make sure it doesn't happen. If history is any indicator, it's not gonna help. If you follow Ray Dalio, he does a really good job of unpacking this. I'm a big fan. He does a great job of articulating and showing math on what he's doing. He's been predicting this for a few years. Now, one caveat to this is this also happens to be an election year. How fascinating that this, now we know, manufactured disease, right? There's reports coming out of China that this actually started in a lab. Fascinating. I'm not making this up. You can do your own research. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, Daniel, but it is fascinating. We're in an election year, okay? We have a flu-like virus that was manufactured in a lab, and so far we have no reason to believe it was sinister. It was just they were trying to figure out a way to treat and create antibodies for it. Although we had Harvard professors, getting arrested that were Chinese nationalists for trying to bring back biology from the United States to China 6 months before this all went down. That's fascinating. Anyways, we have this happening in an election year in which Trump's calling card, the entire reason that people would vote for him is because what? What has he done well? He's pissed everybody off. He's hyper insensitive, but what has been the one thing that has done
Job creation.
The economy.
Job creation.
Money in the system.
Okay, exactly.
Make sure that stimulus package happened.
So now we have an economy that is shut down and is tanking. We have a stock market that is probably going to hit a double bottom here, and we're in a big bear trap. I know it's down a little bit today, but we got some support levels we need to break through. Well, what is he going to do? Well, if he's trying to counteract this, he is going to throw everything. If you know anything about him, which you don't have to, you can just watch. He's going to throw everything in the kitchen sink to try to get the economy running and rocking again because he wants to get reelected. Okay? So there are some things in the short run here that are very fascinating that are playing out, and these tensions between the bulls and the bears are going to create some very interesting opportunities and probably a lot of volatility in the short run until this all begins to pan out. Yeah, America first. Save the children. So all very, very fascinating, and we're seeing this in real time. I promise you, our grandkids, probably even our kids, but our grandkids are going to learn about this in history and be like, what the hell, you lived through this crazy shit? Like this happened in your lifetime? And then we have technology that's radically changing how our economy works, which is really fascinating as well. So a lot of jobs are likely not going to be coming back as a result of this because businesses are finding they can do far more with far less than they realize, which is also very normal. They become hyper efficient, which means they become more profitable. You have AI that's involved now that's taking over jobs. Very, very fascinating time. And in all of this, there is some really incredible opportunities for the people who are willing to see it and ready to seize it. And I have to believe that everybody on this call fits into that camp. Okay. So wealth creation, if you look statistically, wealth creation is suited in a capitalist society to which group of people? There's really two. And if you've read cash flow quadrants, you should know this.
Investors and owners.
Investors and businesses. Okay, and that makes sense. You got to understand. So I gave you that huge pre-frame cash flow quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. Just read Rich Dad Poor Dad. That's the best one. But he has a bunch of other books. One of them is the cash flow quadrant, where he goes into this more in detail. Okay. Robert Kiyosaki is very active right now on social media because he's been predicting this for 20 years, and I think he's doing his happy dance, trying to just like, I did it. I told you this was going to happen. So we have a long ways to go before all his predictions pan out, but interesting stuff. And I love Rich Dad Poor Dad. Great book. Okay, so cash flow quadrant. Here we go. So in a capitalist society, the groups that are the most highly weighted towards wealth creation are investors and businesses. Because you got to know that. And if you understand, okay, I live in America, I live in a capitalist society, capitalism still rules most of the world from a power and influence standpoint. That's not likely going to change, but we're in a kind of a late stage capitalism scenario in which some of these things are going to have to evolve, most likely, if you just look at it in a historical context. But if you understand that, okay, so look at American tax law. Well, we just talked about money. Now we're talking about taxes. I'm going to put everyone that isn't already asleep now. Okay. So, but this is important. By the way, if you're falling asleep listening to this shit, that should be like a ding, ding, ding. Oh, fuck. And that's why I'm stuck. Okay. So tax law is greatly weighted and incentivized towards business and investors. Somebody tell me why.
Because they create wealth and stimulate the economy.
Okay, so I'll give you a couple of frames here to work with. A lot of activists were giving Warren Buffett shit and Steve Jobs shit. I'll use those two as examples. There's lots of them, but Warren Buffett just recently, and he even came out and said something about it. His realized taxable income, his realized tax percentage for 2018 was 15%. Okay, so he's a billionaire. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. His realized taxable income is 15%. Right, and so if you're poor and you don't understand money, you point and you go, that's not fair. That's as much as my mom made. You know, that was her taxable income, and she's, you know, an employee that makes $35,000 a year. Well, how is that?
But
And
the
then,
rich pay the majority of the taxes.
huh?
The rich pay the majority of the taxes. Over 50% of the taxes are paid by the rich.
Yeah, way over. Yeah, but that's beside the point. I love that, Vince. It's true. But without understanding what's going on there, that's a headline, right? That's a mainstream media headline. Billionaires pay less in taxes than middle America. And the uneducated group goes, that's not fair. This system is fucked. And they want that, right? It's there to sow tension on purpose. Now, if you're an uneducated person, you buy that hook, line, sinker, and now you start making judgments around billionaires and money. We talked about the power of judgments and how dysfunctional they are in another call. Judgment creates separation. You're not going to attract what you hate, okay? So now you look at that and you go, that's not fucking fair. But what they're not explaining, and I'll give you a couple of examples here. Again, I'm creating frames because I want to get you to think right. We can talk tactical around money, and we'll have some calls where we do talk tactical about money, but I want to get our mindset around money right first so that the tactical pieces make more sense, okay? So, Buffett, it's true, 15% realized taxable income. Why is that? Okay, the reason is, we'll go to Steve Jobs. They both follow a similar front here, but I'll use Steve Jobs' example. Anybody know, for the majority of the time that Steve Jobs was the CEO of Apple, what his annual salary was?
It was like it was like, what is it? It's a ridiculous
$1.
small amount.
$1. I said it in Spanish. Could it be any clearer? Okay. $1. Okay, I said this the other day on a call. Wealthy people don't give a shit about titles, and they do not give a shit about a paycheck. Poor people care about paychecks and titles. Poor people care how big their paycheck. Now, notwithstanding Maslow's hierarchy, I'm not talking about your needs not being met here, right? There is a point when everyone's going to care about a paycheck if it's the difference between living or dying. But in the scheme of things, in the context of building wealth, wealthy people don't give a shit about paychecks. They do not want W-2'd income. And all of our business owners on this call know exactly why. Right? We instruct all of the business owners, all of our owners on this call, we instruct them, do not take big weekly checks, right? Hold on to that. And there's lots of strategic reasons for that. You want to hold on to your money and keep your money in your business. So I want to explain the math of why it's set up this way so that you understand why it is fair. First of all, so Steve Jobs takes $1 at Apple. Why? He wanted to get paid in Apple stock. Now that's pretty incredible on a couple of fronts. What he's saying is, pay me on my performance. This is why, another thing you'll notice, most wealthy people built their wealth because they were willing to be paid on their performance. Let's see. Hopefully you're catching some philosophical connections here. Wealthy people got wealthy because they were willing to get paid on their performance. whether you're a rock star, you're an athlete, signing bonuses for athletes. Javian Clowney right now is trying to get 18 million a year. I don't think he's going to get it. Why? Because he thinks he's worth that based on his performance. Okay? Businesses get paid based on the performance. Why is Jeff Bezos worth billions? He built a company for 20 years that wasn't even cash flow positive for over a decade, right? Where he wasn't making a fuck ton of money, sacrificing, knowing what he was working towards. Now he built something of value, gets paid on his performance, he's worth billions. People don't understand that. They think that shit's not fair. Okay? I remember when Facebook first went public and they were all billionaires, the COO at the time, which I can't remember his name at the moment, but he was being interviewed, and or their CTO, I think. But he was being interviewed and they were asking, how does it feel to be an overnight billionaire? Right? It was a news article. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he essentially said, well, if working 24/7 for the last 7 years without pay means I'm an overnight billionaire, it feels pretty fucking good. And all he's saying is, you're slapping me in the face to suggest I'm an overnight billionaire who got successful. I have been sacrificing my ass off, getting paid very little for the upside of this event. But the uneducated, they don't get this. They don't see the private victories that led to the public victories. Okay, so back to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs says, pay me $1 and pay me in Apple stock based on my performance. Now that's a man with a lot of confidence. That's a man with a lot of vision, and he knows what he's about. Now we can look back at that with 2020 vision and go, the man is a genius, right? As he's radically changed the shape of our world with his imagination and his vision. But here's the more important thing. When you hold an asset like stock or real estate for over a year and you liquidate that position, it is not considered income, normal taxable income, as in it's not considered the same kind of income that you would get if you were trading hours for a paycheck, which, by the way, is the hardest and easiest way to make money. We'll talk about that in a second, why it's taxed that way, okay? That's interesting. It gets taxed through capital gains, long-term capital gains, which currently sits at 15%, which is why Warren Buffett and Steve Jobs and most wealthy fucking billionaires who run their own companies have very low realized tax rates, because they're using capital gains as their way of building income, and they don't take a W-2 check. Okay, so I'm going to explain it, but I would love, yes, the Dems do want to change that. Now, what would be the problem with changing that? What would happen, okay, over the long run? Maybe the short run we wouldn't see this as a huge problem, maybe we would. What would happen if we taxed capital gains the same way we do normal income? Somebody give me some insight. What would be potential problems with that? One way or the other, or upside. What would be the potential upside?
Less people would invest overall.
Why would I risk $1 million of money that I already own, right? That has the risk of a downside at the same taxable rate as the motherfucker who goes in, shows up, and gets paid? That doesn't make sense. If you want to grow infrastructure, if you want to grow the strength of your economy, you need to let business breathe. You got to give it space. So the tax code is incentivized towards businesses. By the way, unless you work for the government, all jobs in the United States are created by what? By what?
Businesses.
Fucking businesses. So let's go short-term, long-term debt cycle. We were talking about it in the first hour. Okay, if you know the American consumer is the most important part to driving the economy. By the way, our economy, our stock market is considered the safest in the world. So in the middle of a world pandemic, one of the reasons why our economy or our stock market isn't going down is because businesses and countries that are in other emerging markets that are not nearly as safe and don't have the infrastructure to deal with this aren't safe places. They're dumping it into the American economy. They're going, the motherfuckers can print trillions of dollars to keep this shit rocking. We're going to put money there. It's a safe place. So there's a whole strategy behind this. You want, if you're trying to build a strong governmental influence in the world, and you're trying to build an economy that has influence in the world, you want to protect business. They create all the jobs, and you want liquidity in those businesses so that there's strength of economy. Okay, so you're incentivized to do so by getting a better tax rate. Now, do you have to be a billionaire? Do you have to be a billionaire in order to use this tax strategy? Is it reserved for the elite? Do you have to file to get a permit? Do you have to be born into a particular demographic, a particular part of society?
No.
No, everybody has the same rights.
No.
You just have to have financial knowledge.
You mean anybody with the right knowledge could employ this strategy? I think there's a lot of people that don't want you to know that.
Yes.
So instead of bitching about the tax rate, you may want to construct a life that maximizes that tax rate. Okay? So business as investors, because liquidity and investment in business is what keeps them the economy healthy and free. The other option is that the government is the one that funds everything. Is it free then? Fuck no. Heavily regulated, heavily controlled. Go look at most socialist countries and then go, you can see how wonderful that is. Okay? So is it a perfect system? No. If you allow people to have a free market in business, will you deal with greedy people? Yes. Will you deal with unscrupulous people? Yes. Will you deal with people who are going to do some shady shit? Yes. You're going to deal with that in humanity no matter what. I would rather have it very much diversified in business than to give it to one centralized government and trust that those fuckers are going to get it right. Because historically, that hasn't worked out very well, right? That's why we have for the people, by the people. That is why the United States is set up the way it is. That's why we have 3 branches to our government, to keep a check and balance. That's why we have a bipartisan system, so that nobody has too much control. So anybody who's advocating for control, centralized control, you may want to just at least pay attention and go, wait a minute, what's the outcome of this? Okay, does that mean that there aren't shitty businesses? No, of course there are. There's going to be shitty things that happen. That doesn't make the system less true, though. Okay. Okay. So if you want to make money and realize lower taxable income, you want capital gains, short or long-term capital gains. Short-term gains is anything under a year, but I think it needs to be held for 90 days. Keep me honest, but I think that's what it is. You get it at 20%, 15% if it's long-term held over 12 months. Okay, so for instance, you buy a property, it's $100,000. A year later, you sell it for $200,000. You made just keep the math clean. You made $100,000, held it for a year. You're going to get charged 15% tax. Okay, or you can 1031 exchange it into something bigger and prolong the tax rate. Okay, that's pretty fucking amazing. If you made $100,000 as a W-2 employee, what is your taxable income in the great state of fucking California? Oh, it's close to 50% unless you have a great attorney or a great tax attorney. 50%. This is why wealthy people don't want paychecks. You are not going to get wealthy being a W-2 employee if you are only a W-2 employee. That's why for my internal team, I'm building a construct for them where they're getting a piece of the business, so that we can find ways to get money to them, because the system is not set up to make money being an employee, unless you're in a company like Facebook. If you were like the first 100, probably even more than that, first 1,000 employees of Facebook, you made millions of fucking dollars, right? But finding the unicorns out there, I think you got better luck getting struck by lightning. But that's also a possibility. Go work for a big company that gives you stock options. Okay, but anybody can employ this strategy, but again, recurring theme here, wealth is not a possession, it is a mentality. You are not going to give people out of poverty, you are going to educate people out of poverty. Now, if you understand that, Now you understand why our education system is so significant the way it's currently set up. Did you learn anywhere, unless you had a rogue teacher, did you learn anywhere the shit I just talked about? Fuck no, unless you had a rogue teacher. Why? Because that changes the game. There's a lot of interesting pieces that fly into this. You're not going to give people into wealth. You are going to educate people into wealth. You have to go do it for yourself. Okay, so investors, we covered that. You invest in a company and it does well and you held the stock for over a year, you get long-term capital gains. Okay, very low taxable income, very low taxable rate. If we fuck with that too much, we create a problem because then it de-incentivizes people investing and it de-incentivizes people starting businesses. We already covered those two things are what drive the other side of the quadrant, which is the employee, the small proprietorship. Small business is responsible for 70% of the people who are employed in the United States. Okay, so from a construct, you got to understand, we got to keep business healthy, so we're going to keep tax laws lower. That is the reason why when Trump got elected, we were all expecting a recession. Well, not everyone, but some people were believing there was going to be a recession. Instead of a recession, we saw a huge economic boom. Why? He dropped the realized tax rate for everyone, wealthy and businesses. What did that do? Put more money in the economy. It boosted business confidence and consumer sentiment. And despite the fact people hate him, fucking economy is doing great. Everything's moving in the right direction. Why? Because of not quantitative easing, which is monetary policy. He used fiscal policy to create change in economics. Okay, so very, very interesting things. You see this. So instead of going into recession when he took office, we saw the opposite. We saw multiple all-time highs, which he's obviously been touting and quite proud of. But he's a business guy thinking like a business guy. Being the president is more than just being a business, but that's neither here nor there. But from an economic standpoint, fucking was killing it all up until Wuhan and our friend the bat. Yeah, libs do hate him. Okay, so you have investors get capital gains, businesses, they create jobs. So there's tax advantages to being a business owner. We already talked about being an employee. That's the top left side of the quadrant, is the worst place to be for long-term wealth because you are taxed so heavily. Right? Now it's really interesting. Other headlines came out when Trump's tax rates all came in. There was headlines that read, middle-class America barely sees an impact. Stay-at-home mom saw a $50 tax credit. People are complaining they're getting less money back on their tax returns. Right? And these are all headlines. Remember this when you're reading the media. The best lies are 60% truth. The best lies are 60% truth. The headlines that are going to grab you are the ones that are going to make you think that there's some injustice. Remember, we're going back to something we talked about. Some injustice that you can't control. Some injustice that is demonstrating lack for you, that something's being taken from you, right? And keeps you focused on the past or what the future is going to be like. The best headlines hit all three of those because they grab your attention, they make you feel powerless, and then you read it and it incites a chemical reaction in your brain, which creates an emotional experience, which then conditions you to believe what you're reading. There is a science to all of this, and there's a reason why it works. Okay, now hopefully I'm connecting dots because we've been talking about different things. Remember, what you focus on, you begin to feel. So now you read this and you go, this motherfucker Trump. By the way, I'm not advocating for Trump. I'm presenting numbers here. Okay, so you go, this motherfucker Trump, he's a billionaire. He doesn't care about the little guy. Now he creates all these tax laws that help all of his billionaire friends. This is some bullshit because you read some Washington Post headline that said average American got a $50 credit, right? Okay, so I just pre-framed all of the shit that came before this and explained that business is where all the jobs are at, right? That's more businesses, the more jobs there are. So protecting business is a big deal. And then Vincent brought up quite aptly, yes, you are absolutely right. Wealthy people are going to see a bigger real dollar value tax decrease than than somebody who makes $30,000 a year. Can somebody explain to me why that would be? Nobody knows? Okay. I'll explain. How are you going to get more money back if you didn't have any money taken? That's the part of the headline that they didn't want to bring up. If you're not paying taxes, fuckstick, what are you expecting back? Okay? The reason why wealthy people got more money back on their taxes is because they pay a fuck ton more on their taxes. Okay? The other aspect of this, when we decreased, and Vincent brought this up, it's great, we have a realized tax rate that was decreased by percentage points, okay? You may not get as big of a tax return at the end of the year, but if somebody needs to hold your hand like a small child and walk you through this and you did math, you'd realize you paid more or paid less on a per week basis on your paycheck. Meaning you may not be getting as much back at the end of the year, but you weren't paying as much through the entire year. Now, if you have a hard time saving and you depend on that money to pay your bills because you're not very good with your money and you'd rather have the government hold on to it all year long, then I can't help you and that's a different scenario. But you want to be able to do a deep dive here and understand the actual numbers so headlines don't get you all kinds of fucked up. Do your own research. Understand what's really at play here. And then once you understand it, you can use it, because thank God in the United States, we don't have a system that says only the elite get to do these things. Anyone can do these things. Okay. Any questions about that before we go?
No.
When you do your research, do you have any like particular websites that you go to?
It depends on what I'm researching.
I mean, I would say news, but I don't watch the news like that. But
I wouldn't watch the news.
yeah.
There. Yeah, Wall Street Journal, Vincent, that's fair. Wall Street Journal is the closest thing. Or I'll, like, if I'm going to watch the news very often, I'll watch international news. And part of the reason is they don't have the same emotional bias because they don't have the same vested interest in outcome. So it doesn't mean that they don't have their own international bias based on how they see the United States, but at least it's a lot fucking different than the agenda-based news that we get in the United States. So I don't mind Reuters or the BBC. Wall Street Journal's solid. I mean, if you're looking for a US publication, I think Wall Street Journal's the closest thing you're going to get. And they still pride themselves on journalism, so that's true and cool. I agree. But I wouldn't watch the news. That's not, as a whole, until you're ready to dissect it, I wouldn't, because it isn't designed to educate you. It's designed to tell you what to think so that it can drive behavior, which is to get ratings and to get advertisement dollars. So, okay. So we talked about how tax rates change the economy and why they were important, what they're doing. And again, we're at the lowest tax rates we've seen in a long time. Whether Trump gets elected for another 4 years or somebody else comes in, tax rates are going to go back up. There's, especially when we just wrote all things considered, a $10 trillion check. Somebody's going to have to pay for that, likely our children. But this goes back, hopefully all these frames are getting back to everything I just explained, is why you want to own your own business. Business tax structure is the most favorable for an individual. Okay? So, and normally I would write this on a whiteboard. I still haven't quite figured out how to effectively do that in a way that I keep you guys captivated in Zoom, but I'll get more sophisticated, I promise. But normally I'd write this on a whiteboard and I'd show you personal income. You guys are just gonna have to visualize, and some of you have seen this so you know. But if you made $100,000 as an employee, do you pay that at the end of the year or do you pay it on every check? Every fucking check, okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Uncle Sam, and listen, I love my country. I'm so thankful I grew up in the United States. I don't mind paying taxes at all. Like, I'm happy to pay my taxes. I just don't want to have to pay a damn dime more than I have to so that I can spend all of my realized income on things that I care about, even if that means I give it all away to social causes I care about. I personally believe, based on history, that I can do better with my money than the US government can, i.e. $100 fucking hammers. Anyway, Okay, so understanding this, if I'm an individual and I, as a person, W-2 employee, made $100,000, let's say, and we'll say $1 million. We'll make it easy. Okay, if I made $1 million in W-2 income as an employee of another company, okay, and I live in the state of California, without shenanigans, my taxes in the state of California is 51%. 51% of my income is going to the government. That's some crazy shit. And by the way, California is one of the worst run states in the entire union. That should tell you a whole other sort of thing. But anyway, so 51% of my income is going to the state and to federal government. Okay, that's a pretty rough number without any kind of, healthy tax attorney shit. Okay, so wow, that's fun. W-2 employee. That's fun for everybody. And worse, that money is being taken out, okay? Every week I get paid. So I don't ever see it. It gets paid, whatever my exemptions are, whatever, I can fiddle around with this, but some portion of that is gonna get taken out every week. Okay, so let's do understanding that. At $1 million, if my tax rate is 51%, I'm just using a round number here, trying to make the math easy. If my realized taxable income sits at 51% on $1 million, without any issues, that's what it would be. Without any write-offs or anything, that's what it would be. Okay. Now, I take my $490,000 income for the year, and I go buy a $100,000 car, because I live in Orange County, and that's what the great people of Orange County go and do. It's very smart. Good place to put your money, because cars are great assets. Okay. So I just spent $100,000 on a car. How much did I actually spend on that car?
Taxes and everything, probably 110.
I like a guess for Quan. Nope.
140.
Nick, what'd you say?
About 120.
140, because you're paying like a percentage from the APR and stuff.
About 135, 140.
You're not wrong if you got it financed. If you paid cash, but you're missing a more important piece, and you're missing why wealthy people stay wealthy. Because
600
percentages. If I use post-tax money to buy a car, follow me, that car actually cost me $151,000.
Holy.
Is that including the interest like over time?
No.
Just getting, because they have those people selling.
There's a principle here. I want you guys to get this. I'm going to stay here until we get it. So we're all on the same page. If I'm using post-tax money, by the way, anytime you can purchase something pre-tax, do it. Where's a couple of places that you can do things pre-tax? Jump in here, guys. All right, I'm going to jump in. So pre-tax
for your business.
And as an employee, pre-tax things are like health insurance. Okay, if you're paying health insurance pre-tax, that means that money comes out of your taxable income. It's removed from your taxable income, which means you're not paying the 51% premium on that money. You're getting 51% more on your money. This is why the wealthy are getting wealthier. Okay, 401k pre-tax, an IRA pre-tax. Things that you can put money in. So if I'm in $1 million, I want to do as much shit as I can pre-tax so that I'm not investing post-tax money or buying things with post-tax money where I already took a 51% hit. So going back to my car analogy, if I bought a car, $100,000 cash, but it was post-tax, add on the 51% premium in tax that I paid for the year. Okay. So I'm going to paint the second side of this picture, so hopefully the second side will hit this home. If I'm a business owner, I run my own business, and I made $1 million. Well, Uncle Sam, God bless him, he recognizes, as we've been talking about all day, I'm responsible for job creation. I'm responsible for investment back into my community. I'm responsible for paying health insurance for my employees. Well, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to make you pay taxes every single week. We're going to have you pay taxes at the end of the year on any profit left over. Now, normally I would show this on a whiteboard and it would make more sense, but for the individual, you look at it like this. Individual gets $1 million in income. You could write $1 million income. Right below that, right? Government taxes, 51%. Under that, right? Post-tax income, $490,000. Okay, it's 51% tax hit. As a business, it works the exact opposite, which is why you want to run your own fucking business. In the business world, stay with me, I hope this makes sense. You make $1 million in business, then you pay your expenses first with pre-tax money. Expenses include insurance, utilities, things for your business, your internet, your computers, your phone, your insurance. All of these things you are now paying with pre-tax money, which means you're getting a 51% increase on your income if you're $1 million earner. Okay? And then at the end of the year, anything that's left over, meaning I've already paid all of my expenses, anything that's left over is what I actually get taxed on. And oh, by the way, you get taxed on, I think, a flat rate of 20% right now. Okay? So if you're just doing pure math and you understand the tax code and how percentages work, you want to be a business owner. That $100,000 car, as I'm using that as an example, there's other caveats to this, but if the $100,000 car post-tax as an individual cost me $151,000 because I'm getting my 51% premium on taxes right there, which money I've already paid into. As a business owner, I buy that $100,000 car pre-tax. There isn't a 51% premium, meaning I just saved myself $51,000 fucking dollars.
Oh.
Why wealthy people keep getting wealthy.